So good morning, crew. Hey, sort of enthusiastic students who have come again and again. So we're going to begin our class on mind and mental factors again, as we have always done, with some meditation. So sit comfortably. I'm going to turn off my air conditioner and relax your body and mind. Recognize your respiration with mental factor attention. And once you have recognized it, keep the mental factor mindfulness focused on it. Keep it in mind to the exclusion of all the other thoughts. Remember, this is an exercise not in controlling the breathing, just observing it. So that's sort of the resting state, respiration. You have some success in calming the mind a little. Bring your attention to your mental consciousness. If you can, in the past you've had an experience of the clear light nature of the mind, you can try to develop a remembering consciousness of that to begin with. Or just looking at the contents of your mind, try to see the spaciousness between the thoughts. The fact that even when thoughts are present, you can defocus on them, recognizing that their arisal indicates that the mind has this clear light nature, non-obstructing nature. So we're what we are aiming at is a non-conceptualizing state, that is to say, without other ideation, other thoughts. Still is conceptual in the sense that you're having a mental image of the clear light nature of the mind up until the point when you actually have a direct experience of it. But it's factually concordant. This is our developmental Buddha nature, what His Holiness calls a conventional Buddha nature, as opposed to the emptiness of the mental consciousness, which is our ultimate Buddha nature, or Tathagata Garbha. Let go of your sense of the body. Let go of the subtle grasping to a self of persons. Those are just thoughts within your mind stream, mental consciousness. Recognize that the implications of this are that we can eliminate all faults. They don't stain the mind. Our ignorance can be eradicated. Even the common parlance sense of ignorance, not knowing things, we can learn them, we can know them. We can develop all the good qualities. There's nothing that hinders us from developing empathy, compassion, bodhicitta. Nothing that hinders us other than not having the right causes that we can, through the practice of the stages of the path, we can create those causes and develop all the good qualities. This, in turn, recognizing this is a result of our having a life of leisure and endowment that we have now, but we may have not utilized, in a sense, wasted opportunities in the past to utilize it for its highest purpose, to be able to make realizations, to be able to achieve liberation and enlightenment for the sake of sentient beings. So taking into mind the entirety of living beings, most of whom, because they're infinite, are kind of strangers to us right now. Even those that we have acquaintance with are divided into friends, enemies, and strangers to our common apprehension of things, recognizing the equality of all of them, that over the course of numberless lives, they've all been intimately related with us. They've all been our mother and depthlessly kind. Even when they haven't been mother, even as strangers, they have benefited us in providing the infrastructure of our world, the opportunity for us to ripen negative karma in the here and now, even as enemies. They benefited us rather than having to experience those karmic seeds in the hell realms or the animal or preta realms in the future. And all these beings are equal to us in wanting to be free of suffering, wanting to be happy, wanting to be enjoined, endowed with happiness. They all have the capability, they all have the Buddha nature, conventional and ultimate. And that our equality with them allows us to recognize that we can impute our own identity onto the entirety of the aggregates of sentient beings rather than just in our own 5 aggregates. When others suffer, we can feel discomfort and wish that suffering to be eradicated. When others lack happiness, just as when we personally lack happiness and we wish for it, we can wish for the happiness of others. And recognizing that the only way that we can bring about those wishes fully for the sake of all sentient beings is for ourselves to evolve, to become enlightened, to become omniscient, which serves 2 purposes: our own purpose in finding stable, everlasting, blissful happiness, and the purpose of others. In that enlightened state, we can manifest effortlessly, spontaneously, without error, for the welfare of others. A state of mind that wishes that is called bodhicitta. And in order to develop that, we have to understand our mind. Make a firm resolution or motivation that I'm going to participate this morning for the purpose of better understanding the mind, this laboratory within which we do these great experiments. Not just as an intellectual exercise, but as an aid to be able to develop bodhicitta, renunciation, wisdom, realizing emptiness, and all of the other associated stages of the path, to be able to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. That's my purpose in listening, participating this morning. How wonderful that would be if I became enlightened. I will become enlightened. Oh, Guru Buddhas, please grant me blessings to be able to actualize this wish. And then bringing your attention back to the present, relaxing. Good morning, everyone, from north to south, east and west. Oh, I have a good crowd this morning. Anyone have any lingering questions or comments? How are your meditations going? This meditation, Mark, that's kind of wobble. You didn't mean that. I was going. Okay, I thought you were going. Sometimes that means,
inconsistent.
Inconsistent. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my mind going everywhere.
Oh, okay. Okay. I thought that was going like it was going good.
No.
Okay. Going everywhere. So,
those are my thoughts.
so I did get a message from David yesterday saying that he was lost. So I would give him a first opportunity if he has some question. David, do you have anything?
I don't. Thank
No.
you so much for the opportunity, though.
You're so lost.
I'm sure I will.
Okay.
I don't know what questions to ask.
So I noticed Ali's hand went up before Louis. Louis, did you have a question, or was that an accident, Ali? I thought I saw the yellow hand by your.
That was an that was an accident.
Okay, no problem.
For asking.
Yeah. So Louis has a question. I think his hand is up.
Yeah, it was you were asking about meditation, and I've been having a fairly consistent problem. I have no problem. I have very little problems meditating on my breath, but the minute I try to look at my mind, try to catch things arising and stuff, it's like all the thoughts go away. I cannot see anything. It's like all the thoughts just disappear. But when I go back to trying to concentrate on my breath, they all come back. And then when I go to look at them, they all disappear.
So interesting. So the thoughts that are in your mind when you're watching your breathing, and the fact that they seem to disappear when when you try to concentrate on the mind, that might mean that you're not really watching your breathing very carefully, because if you really concentrate on it in the same way that when you concentrate on the mind, on one particular aspect of the mind, the fact that it is non-obstructing, clear light nature, if you focus on that, it gives no space to energize other thoughts, to elongate their continuity. If when watching the breathing, thoughts a bit again intrude, plans, thoughts of the past, or, desire for tea or whatever, that's because of the fact you're not holding that mindfulness on the breathing as well as you could. I would be surprised if when you're watching the mind, all the thoughts disappear completely. There are probably still some there, but the fact that there's that disparity, maybe you're more practiced in watching the mind in previous lives, so that's a little more familiar to you. Don't know.
My silly impression was that they were hiding.
Well,
the minute I tried to find them, they hid.
So if the thoughts disappear, it doesn't mean that they are non-existent. They sometimes are like percolating below the surface of your recognition of them. You're not aware of them. But that's good. That's a first start. I'll leave that answer there. Anyone else have another question as we're here?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Oh, Nadine, you have a question.
Thank you, dear Venerable George. I have two questions.
Yeah.
When we meditate on
hands, I see there were two hands. So yeah.
Yes. When we meditate on the breath, is it the mind consciousness which meditates or the body consciousness?
Well, at first, watching the breathing involves the tactile consciousness. So it is the body consciousness, but that is apprehended by your mental consciousness. And that is the main thing that's being observed here. Eventually, if you use breathing as your object of concentration, say if you try to develop shamatha, tranquil abiding, or what do we call it, shine in Tibetan, if you try to develop that using the breathing, at a certain point, you no longer are watching the breathing. You develop a mental image of the air element, because that's what you're watching here. Physically, you're watching the movement. Air has, of the four elements, the air element has the quality of moving. So you can develop a mental image of that, watching your breathing for a long period of time. And in the end, it's that object that you use to develop. If you're using breathing to try to develop shamatha, it's that you use to. So it's completely mental at that time. You're no longer involving the tactile consciousness to watch the breathing. So there could be kind of a progression toward that as you're getting a better and better understanding of that. You no longer are involving the tactile consciousness so much. It's a recognition of that nature of the air element.
Thank you.
Mm.
And the second question, of the sense consciousnesses, can only some experience pleasure, or all, or none?
Oh, I think all of this, all of the consciousnesses can experience. If they say that none, then that would be really.
Maybe pleasure is only in the mind?
No, yeah. So
No.
they definitely can experience pleasure. Say, for instance, and pain. Say more accessible is like if you get stuck. If you're unaware that a mosquito is on your arm and it bites you, you feel pain in the sense, in the body sense consciousness, right? And then as a result of that, you may feel mental displeasure, pain, sort of, or you don't have to, the mind doesn't have to follow along with that. The mind can actually, like this Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when I first went to Kopan in 1974, I would go up to his room sometime in the evening, and he would have his arm, he would have the screen open at his window and his arm out, just at the edge, and all of these mosquitoes were on his arm, feasting on his blood. So he was making offering of his blood to them. And although it was probably, his sense consciousness, his body sense consciousness was experiencing pain, but his mental consciousness was probably blissful, thinking, oh, mother sentient beings, giving and so forth. So the mind doesn't have to follow the physical feelings. The mind can, ordinary people, it does, if you feel something good, your mind wants to have that. To someone with renunciation, if something is experienced as good, the mind feels some apprehension in that this is a hindrance. This is feeling is a cause of attachment. Pleasant feeling is a cause of attachment, and therefore is unhappy that there is some physical pleasure involved. So there's a whole spectrum of things that can happen between the mind and the body, like that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, okay, how are we doing? So, just as a reminder, we've talked about the difference between primary mind and mental factors, chitta, chaita, and we talked about the relationship between the two, that they are primary mind holds the general perceptual field, and the mental factors that are the same entity with it are experiencing the particularities of the field. Or we can say that mind and mental factors bear 5 similarities. They share 5 similarities as the same referent and same support and so forth. We talked about the fact that of the of the primary consciousnesses, there are 6. The 5 senses and the mental consciousness, the 6th consciousness. Of the mental factors, we said there are 51, and we're in the process of enumerating the 5 omnipresent mental factors. Kundro in Tibetan, kun in this sense means always, dro means going, so always going or omnipresent. I think in Sanskrit, what is it? Samantaga or samantaga. Samanta means always. Ga is the root verb of going, like gachami, I go. I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. You've probably heard when the Theravada monks chant this in Bodh Gaya and so forth. Buddhanam savanam gachami. I go for refuge to the Buddha. So ga is go. So we're talking about the 5 omnipresent mental factors. Rowena, what are the 5 omnipresent mental factors? Don't look at your book. You don't know? You're talking, but we can't hear you.
Ask someone else right now. I am just coming back into orbit. I have been gone for 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
In medical world, when I'm barely present.
Okay, send down the relief module soon. So Ida, what are the 5 omnipresent mental factors?
Feeling, discrimination, intention, contact, and attention.
Good. Okay. Good. So you can give different orders. Usually when we talk about the 5 aggregates, we usually have a specific order: form, feelings, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. Whereas in the mental factors, the omnipresent can be a little bit different order, depends on your orientation, but that's what you enumerated is pretty much standard. I think what we're using in our book, so we talked about feeling, the basic important point to understand is feeling is an experience. It doesn't have an object that it feels. It's the experience of pleasure, pain, or indifference, or let's say neutral, is feeling. It doesn't have an external object like some of the other mental factors. It's the main way that karma ripens on our aggregates. Discrimination or discernment, other ways that it's translated. I saw it recently translated, I think I mentioned last time, as conception, which, as you've studied low rig, some of you studied low rig before, you get confused by that because you think conception has to do with conceptual mind. But the Sanskrit word is samjna, and Tibetan dushe. Discrimination is a mental factor, is the aspect of the mind that is able to discern or discriminate between things. On the perceptual front, it's just the ability of let's say the sense consciousnesses, which are passive and don't do any thinking, to see some differences in the perceptual field. Let's say if you're talking about vision. Without discrimination, the perceptual field would be kind of homogeneous. the conceptual mind, in the mental consciousness, it also has the function of being able to say, this is a man, or that is a dog, or it is involved in discriminating one thing from another. It has the characteristic of apprehending the sign of something, the indication of something. We were talking about intention, the third one. The Abhidharma Samuccaya says, what is intention? It is a compositional mental action of the mind. It has the function of engaging the mind in virtue, non-virtue, or the unspecified, or unpredicted. Remember this word, lungmaten. Things that are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous are referred to in the Buddhist scriptures as unpredicted or unspecified. It's not as though you don't have any understanding about that. The Buddha didn't say they were virtuous or non-virtuous. So that's like the third alternative. Compositional mental action, it referring to what we generally, when we talk about the 12 links, what's the first link? Anyone know what the first of the 12 links is? Ali, have you studied enough? Do you know the 12 links?
Unfortunately, I do not, but I would love to learn about them.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the 12 links, there are lots of things you can read about the 12 links. So the first link is ignorance. The second link is what? Bob, what's the second link? Do you know?
Let's see, is the second link, I forget. Is it compositional action?
Yeah, so in our definition, our text, it says compositional mental action. So for intention. So generally, when we talk about actions, we can say compositional actions. So it's the act of composing karma. It's the act of composing this imprint upon the mind due to the action. So intention is a state of a mental factor that moves the mind to a general object. Let's say, just as has been said above, the mental factor which rouses and moves the mind that is concomitant with it to an object is called intention. So rouses and moves. So if you talk about intention in the conceptual mind, in the mental consciousness, it can involve some kind of decision making on your part. For instance, the intention to drink a cup of coffee, right? That kind of means like a decision or an intent to do something. In the sense consciousnesses, it has no sense of decision making. It's just what moves the consciousness to the object. It can be influenced by the mental consciousness. Like if out of the corner of your eye, you see, like the story I've told so many times, you see someone that you think looks like you out of the corner of your eye, and then your eye consciousness moves to that. That can be influenced by the mental consciousness, but it itself is not have the same kind of intention as when you intend to have a cup of coffee or intend to be better. Louis, you have a thought?
I was curious when you were talking about rousing and moving and mental intention. Is there an implication that if I have a knee-jerk reaction that doesn't involve my mind, it never gets to the traditional mind, it never gets to the brain, it just hits a local nerve center and generates an automatic reaction, my leg moves. would that be sort of like a sense intention?
Well, your sense that's I don't think that is an intention. Here, intention means, say, for instance, in the physical, let's say in the body consciousness, intention would mean that the body consciousness is paying attention to some particular thing. Like, say, for instance, if you got bitten by a mosquito, or if someone gives you a nice massage, and your body consciousness moves to that location.
So the intention in that case would be just to bring up a feeling behind it.
The intention is that which is the movement of the mind to the perceptual field.
Okay.
I'll read you here in Jeffrey Hopkins, in Geshe Rapkin's book, Intention. Intention is defined as the distinct mental factor that moves the primary mind with which it bears the 5 similarities, as well as the other attendant mental factors to that primary mind, moves it to the object.
Okay.
So it is the fundamental of action, of karma. It's what creates karma. It is karma. It is both the conscious and automatic motivating element of consciousness that causes the mind to involve itself with and apprehend its objects. So when it says here, conscious and automatic, the automatic would mean the perceptual field, and sometimes in the mental, and the conscious would mean when you consciously decide to move to something, to apprehend something. Just as a magnet by nature moves any iron that it comes, I guess iron, probably some other things are also magnetic. Just as a magnet by nature moves any iron that comes in contact with it, likewise, by the mere existence of intention, the mind is moved to various beneficial and detrimental objects. So, for instance, if you observe something which is attractive and your mind, as a result of that, develops attachment, when intention moves the mind and the mental factors to that object, you are creating negative karma of attachment. It's the presence of attachment in the mind. The primary mind has various mental factors, as you're saying. Right now we're just talking about the the omnipresent mental factors, but also, say, attachment can be in that mind. If the mind moves while attachment is in it, the example that I've often heard is like like if you rub a cloth along the surface of a table, if there's grit underneath it, it leaves some deformation in the surface, scratches the surface. So like in this case, the grit is kind of like the presence of attachment. If there's a virtuous state of mind present when you move to the object, that creates virtuous karma. Instead of a deformation like the scratching, maybe it's kind of like polishing the surface, like putting talc underneath. In addition, intention is the actual principle of activity. It itself is mental karma. All of our, usually we say actions are intention and that which is created by the intention. That is the physical and verbal actions that are, that we engage in due to the mental karma. So the principle of all of them is the mental action of intention. You can create actions, even without intending them. You can step on an ant and kill it, without any intention. You may not even have known that you did that. Probably we've done that many times in our lifetime. If you walk out in the grass or in the sidewalk or something like that, those actions are said to be their karma, but they are not, as they were unintended. They are not necessary to be experienced. They won't necessarily ripen in some detrimental form in the future, when you talk about the various details of karma. Whether an action is mental, vocal, or physical, the formative element that is primarily responsible, I think primarily means that it can be actions that are done without intention. The formative element that is primarily responsible and that accumulates tendencies and imprints in the mind is the mental factor intention. Thus, it acts as a basis for conditioned existence, for our samsaric existence. Okay. So our text says, just as it has been said above, the mental factor which rouses and moves the mind, that it is concomitant with it, that means the primary mind with which it bears similarities, is called intention. This is said to be the principle among all mental factors. It is taught that any mind or mental factor engages an object due to the power of this mental factor. When we engage an object, like when we talked about low rig, we talked about the object of engagement, the engaged object. Any object that we engage is brought about due to this mental factor. And depending upon what is present, what other mental factors are present in the mind, whether they be virtuous mental factors or non-virtuous mental factors, we create virtuous or non-virtuous karma. If there are no virtuous or non-virtuous mental factors present, just neutral mental factors, then we create neutral karma or unpredicted karma. For example, just as iron is helplessly drawn by a magnet, the mind helplessly engages in an object due to this mental factor, the mental factor of intention. So if we divide up intention in terms of the bases, there are 6. That means intention arising from contact upon the aggregation of a visible form, an I sense power, and an I consciousness. The same formula goes for all the rest. So what does that mean? Aggregation, or the coming together of a visible form, the eye faculty, which is a subtle matter in the back of the eyeball, within the rods and cones, even more subtle than the rods and cones. When the image, the aspect of the object, and impinges upon that, along with the aggregation of an I consciousness, there can be intention arisen from that. So contact, kind of, in some presentations, contact of the 5 omnipresent mental factors, contact almost comes first all the time. So we'll talk about contact next. Intention arising from contact upon the aggregation of a sound, an ear sense, and an ear consciousness. So when those 3 come together and you have ear consciousness, there can be intention arisen from that. Bob, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I find actually the description quite interesting, because normally, as you say, we have this notion of sort of intention as motivational factor.
Mm-hmm.
Although Geshe Temple actually says that's not always the case in his commentary. But anyway, I mean, this description is quite interesting, because, for example, the image of iron being drawn to the magnet, it feels like the intention is almost drawn to the object, like it almost spontaneously arises. Like an object appears and it's just natural for our mind to move toward it without even thinking about it or whatever.
It can be that way. And sometimes even if the mind is not drawn naturally, conceptually, you can force the mind, like your mind is not drawn to looking at someone suffering, but out of compassion and thinking about it, you engage your mind with that. So that would be an example of intention in the way that colloquially we use the word, like intending to do that. But it also has this involuntary activity also. The example of the magnet, I think it might be misunderstood. It doesn't mean that the mind automatically zaps to something. It means that you create karma simply by the presence of intention. The intention is moving the mind to the object. I don't think it means that the mind is involuntarily moved. Although, does it say that here? Does it say involuntarily? Intention arising. What did we say here? It is said to be the principle among mental factors taught that any mind or mental factor engages an object due to the power of this mental factor, intention. For example, just as iron is helplessly drawn by a magnet, the mind helplessly or without its own power engages an object due to this mental factor, intention. So it just means that the intention is which moves all the rest of the mind and the mental factors to the object without you having to choose to move each and every one. So there's intention arisen from all of these six consciousnesses, these six contacts. This intention is mental action. In general, there are two types of actions. Actions which are intentions, this is a mental action, and intended actions. So I've mentioned this before. So for instance, if you decide to swat the mosquito, your hand moving, I should give some positive examples. Your hand moving has been motivated or intended by the mental consciousness, which perhaps wanting to be free of the suffering of the mosquito, or to be sure that it won't bite you again, or maybe just out of malice, wanting it to suffer. This much what happens in our politics, right? It is intended by that. So intended actions are actions of body and speech, and also intended actions of mind. When you like say you decide to develop compassion, to move your mind to something. Louis, you have a thought?
I have a.
We lost you.
Okay, I got it now.
Right.
I have a question as to whether karma itself can cause the arise of intention, and that whether the fruition of a karmic tendency, or if you have karmic tendencies, whether that can govern certain moments when intention arises or is drawn to an object. It's because of karma behind it, forcing it to that object. Or is that even a consideration?
I'm not quite certain what you're saying. So intention is the moving of the mind, engaging of the mind with an object. And as a result of that intention, karma, that intention is the creation of karma. That intention, that moving of the mind creates karma.
Okay, the question I have then is, how does intention choose between one object another object? Is there a karmic component to which object it decides to be drawn to?
Yeah, I think so. When we talk about, as Bob was saying before, if your mind is just drawn to something because of some karmic attraction to something or repulsion to something, that can be as a result of karmic imprints. Even your decision to move the mind to engage in some object has, if you trace back, it has some karmic causation for your interest or disinterest or repulsion in something. Bob, you were about to make another comment also.
Yeah, I mean, one of the aspects of karma is the tendency to repeat actions. So in that sense, I mean, one could have a tendency, to do things. But I think it also raises this whole issue of free will, because I think in the Buddhist notion, we can freely choose certain things, even though we may have these tendencies that tend us to go in autopilot and do things. But, I think part of the reason of meditation and so forth is to free our mind of these tendencies so that we can make better choices.
Yeah. Lama Zopa Rinpoche likes to, I remember at Kopan, he would marvel at Western people saying that the idea of karma, that we have karmic instincts that predispose us to particular activity, that it was contrary to free will. That if everything's determined, whether you're going to, some karma determines whether you like another person or dislike them, or if you engage in this or that, that somehow contradicts free will. Rinpoche said, that's not the case at all. We have free will. Say, for instance, if there are two doors and you have the choice of going through either of them, there may be the Buddha knows the karmic predispositions on your mind to know which door you'll choose. Maybe one of them is red and one of them is green or something like this. The Buddha with omniscient wisdom knows exactly what you'll choose, but that doesn't mean that you didn't have the choice. You still have the choice of which one, but the Buddha knows which one you'll choose. So chew on that for a while. iPhone Dawn, you have a question.
Hello, Venerable George. Thank you so much for your teaching today. So my question, this may not be fluid in our subject right now, but it goes back to feeling. And so when I see my mother or my children or my teacher, and I feel pleasure, and I feel what I've described in my life as love, and knowing now that there's virtuous and then there's attachment, right? Because
right.
So that's coming at the same time. Is it my job as a bodhisattva, as working toward the bodhisattva path, to understand that when that pleasurable feeling arises, that I remember impermanence, I remember the karma of the interdependent factors that are bringing me to this, and to not fantasize or follow the pleasure because because the feeling is just like a flag, and it's neither non-virtuous nor virtuous. Like, is it my job to subdue the pleasure in a way is it my job to subdue the pleasure and to understand impermanence and karma, and that really I kind of want to save the pleasure for hopefully realizations on the path?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about this before. So when pleasure arises, there's nothing negative about pleasure. Pleasure does not create, the feeling of pleasure or the feeling of suffering doesn't itself create negative karma. It's our response to that, habituated, as Bob said, because of our familiarity with that in the past, that attachment can rise. As I was talking about it earlier in the class, a bodhisattva, when they experience pleasure, sometimes, if they have good control of the mind, they will recognize the disadvantages of pleasure, and so they will subdue the rising of attachment. You can apply antidotes at that time, for instance, recognizing that this is impermanent, that it's not real pleasure, in the sense that it's only the reducing of one suffering, replacing it with another, while the bigger suffering is going down. We call that pleasure, and then, sitting when you're hot, going out, sitting under the cool shade of a tree, there's pleasure, contaminated pleasure, when the suffering of heat goes down and the suffering of cooling goes up. And then after some time, you start to feel cool and you think, oh, let's sit in the nice warm sun. Realizing things like that, applying antidotes to the attachment, you can cause the attachment to decrease. So you've recognized the pleasurable feeling, and you, as a proto-bodhisattva, as someone who wishes to be a bodhisattva, practicing with real bodhicitta and so forth, one would practice in that way to try to subdue them, and even go out of one's way to avoid, in extreme circumstances, and avoid those kind of pleasurable contacts. Say, for instance, if one had taken vows of renunciation as a monk or nun, one would avoid, cushioning, butting shoulders, or with a member of the opposite sex or a member of the same sex, and because one realizes that in so doing, one would experience pleasurable feelings, and that attachment could rise, becoming a sort of an antagonist of your renunciation, sort of decreasing your renunciation. So if you eat food that's good tasting, there's nothing wrong with that. As you experience pleasure, just if you have, say, I remember reading once in a psychology, it was Psychology Today or something, talking about preferences as opposed to attachment. So if you prefer, what's that Italian, what is it, Karen, rice with, Karen's disappeared. She's still here? The rice
Yes.
with mushrooms. What is it? What is it called?
Rice with mushrooms?
Risotto.
Risotto.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
Risotto.
Of course.
Risotto con funghi. So I would prefer, rather than white rice with nothing, I would prefer risotto con funghi with mushroom, with mushroom. But if I don't have risotto con funghi, it's okay. On the airplane, if you have attachment and you're not, and you're not in first class, and they give all the first class people, this expensive bottled water, and they're back to you, you get this cheap plastic bottle that's easily squeezed, that's, no brand. And if you're annoyed with that, anger rises because you had attachment to the other one, that's something to be avoided. So on the Bodhisattva path, so one has to, you can still, even though it doesn't bring as much, maybe as much pleasure to have the ungassed water in a plastic bottle. You still, you would have preferred to have the other one, but this is acceptable. So one tries to deal with the emotions, with the rising of attachment, anger, and all of the other things by recognizing that they are reactions to our experience of feeling. So I may not have answered your question.
You did.
I
So
didn't.
you did
Oh,
answer.
okay. Okay. That's
And so if I'm understanding, what I'm understanding is that I can recognize the pleasure and also hopefully recognize the attachment. That's the job. And then
Right.
it's really to let go of the attachment.
Exactly. So it doesn't mean that except in extreme cases, say like a person who had taken vows of renunciation, they would avoid, like in Thailand and Sri Lanka, I think, the monks that come on the bus, and I say monks, although there are nuns, generally that most of the monastic communities in those countries are monks. So on the bus, there's a special place for them to sit. So no women would come in physical contact, because if they came in physical contact, there's a chance that attachment could rise, threatening their renunciation. They might even have some arousal, some, sexual arousal as a result of that kind of contact. So that would be avoided. In our case, we don't have to go to that extreme. Just as long as you can recognize when you are engaging in something out of attachment and recognizing that will create negative karma. So pursuing the pleasurable feelings, wishing not to be separated from them is an indication of attachment. So when the pleasurable feeling comes, okay, that's okay, but not necessarily to raise attachment so that you continue to have that feeling and not to be separated from it. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Thank you, Venerable George.
Okay. So intention is mental action. In general, there are two types of actions: actions that are intentions and intended actions. In the Abhidharma Kosha, Treasury of Knowledge, it says there are intention that there are, or maybe I have to read it, the whole sentence. There are intention that produced, there are intention and that produced by it. Or could you say there is intention and there is that which is produced by it.
Excuse me, Venerable.
Yes.
Rowena has a question in the chat.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay. I didn't see that. Let me see.
Would you like me to read it?
I can see, doesn't attachment often lead to exaggeration and fantasy? Oh, yeah.
Simple observation.
Yeah, sure. And so when we talk about the defects of the afflictions, of the delusions, of attachment and so forth, attachment itself arises because of exaggeration. That is to say, when you say it often leads to, attachment is a mental state that, having observed something that is pleasurable, exaggerates that quality to the extent that one's mind doesn't want to separate from it. So rather than saying it leads to exaggeration, it is a result of exaggeration. That is, attachment observes something that's pleasurable and exaggerating in various ways. It's permanent, it's real pleasure, and so forth. Then it becomes attachment. it's not as though attachment it can lead to more exaggeration. Sure, yeah, when you're attached to something, then you even exaggerate even more. But as attachment as a result of having experienced something that's pleasurable and exaggerating, anger, repulsion, all of the mental factors that fall into that category. Because when we talk about the three poisonous minds, you could say all 84,000 delusions can be subsumed into these three. So there are some that are associated with repulsion, some with attachment, some with ignorance, some that are associated with two or all three. There are various variations, but all of them come about because of some kind of basic exaggeration, experiencing something that's pleasurable, experiencing something that's suffering or unpleasant. One exaggerates and thinks, this is like unbearable, thinking that you can't possibly bear it, that it is something that will remain, thinking almost in the mind, exaggerating that it's permanent unless I do something about it, unless I strike out and stop that other person, they're going to keep on irritating me and so forth. So they all come about because of some kind of exaggeration, rather than saying only that they are that they can lead to exaggeration. They themselves come about because of exaggeration. Okay, Roanna, does that help? So there is intention and there is intention that is produced. There is intention and that produced by it. Intention is mental activity. That produced by it are actions of body and speech. Intended actions are of two types: physical actions, verbal actions. Furthermore, although they are infinite, it is taught that condensing the principal ones gives the 7 physical and verbal actions. Have you heard about this, the 7 physical and verbal actions? There's numberless actions. David, you haven't heard. 7 actions of body and speech. Okay, you've heard, but you just think. So when we talk about the 10 non-virtuous actions, right? If you take off the last 3, which are mental, 10 minus 3, David? 7, right? So
7.
4 actions of body: killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. Then 4 actions of speech: lying, abusive speech, divisive speech, and idle gossip, right? You can give them different names. Those are called the 7 physical actions, negative actions. Furthermore, although they are infinite, it is taught that condensing the principal ones, when we talk about ones, what are we talking about here? Verbal and physical actions, gives 7 physical and verbal actions. And taking into account their motivations, as well as the 10 paths of action. So when you take vows of a lay person, pratimoksha vows, or if a monk or nun were to take the vows of a monk or nun, what actions are prohibited, or which actions are one tries to vow against pursuing? Do you know? Nadine, do you know? Oh, no, Doris was raising. Do you know, Doris?
No killing. No
Yeah,
lying.
no, yeah, but in general.
Oh, okay. So I thought those were the 5. I think I know those ones. Which
Louis,
one?
what do you think? What do you guys say?
I was going to say those are generally the actions that generate negative karma. The reason for those first vows is to stop preventing negative karma.
Well, you can create negative karma with the mind, with mental action.
Well,
You can have hatred.
There's also 3 vows for the mind too. But
no, not in the Pratimoksha vows. So in the Pratimoksha vows, which include the vows of a layperson and the vows of monks and nuns, only actions of body and speech that you vow to curb. You know, all of if you look through them, they're all actions of body and speech. There's no actions of mind. And the reason is that it's said that the mental actions coming so quickly are difficult to prevent. So when we take vows of a layperson or of a monk or nun, not talking about bodhisattva vows or tantric vows, they include mental actions also. I'm just talking about pratimoksha vows. They are only prohibiting negative actions of body and speech. They say that making a firm intention, taking a vow not to create those actions, creates what's called a certain kind of form, which is not visible. We mentioned it when we talked about tenets. Jeffrey Hopkins coined the term non-revelatory form. So it's not revealed to others that you've taken this vow. People with clairvoyance can see that you've taken a vow not to do something. There's kind of some form that can, subtle kind of form that can actually be perceived by someone with clairvoyance, but it's not revealed to ordinary sight. It's not something you can see with the eye. That non-revelatory form is like a barrier that, as long as you haven't declined in your aspiration to keep the vow, it prevents you from doing those actions. They say something like building a dam prevents the flow of water, from that dam. So because actions of body and speech are material, they're physical, only those, non-revelatory form, making this vow can only prevent them. It can't prevent the mental actions. When you talk about bodhisattva vows and tantra vows, many of them are mental, mental actions that you not to give up on the Dharma and so forth and so on. They require a greater amount of introspection and determination to prevent them. Okay, so through condensing the most obvious among them, furthermore, although they are infinite, it is taught that condensing the principal ones gives the 7 physical and verbal actions. So those are the principal motivated actions, physical ones that are not mental. So when we talk about the last 3 mental actions, what are they? Malice, what are they? Does anyone know?
Holding wrong views,
Holding
malice or ill will, being essentially attachment.
Yeah,
coveting.
Attachment. Yeah. So
malice, ill will, and holding.
So there are extreme forms of the 3 root poisons, right? So extreme form of anger, repulsion is what we call malice. So it's like the determination that you're going to get someone back. It's not just rising of anger or something that like that is not called that negative action of mind. Covetousness is not just a rising of attachment. It's saying, I'm going to get that. Like you covet something. What was it in the Bible? Is it covet thy neighbor's? Do not covet thy neighbor's wife. right? Do they say husband also? Is it so
No.
patriarchal? So
Yes.
patriarchal. It's only do not covet thy neighbor's wife. It doesn't say do not covet thy neighbor's husband, but should include that. So covetousness is an extreme form of attachment that has made up one's mind that one will, do whatever is necessary to get that. Wrong view is a strong, it's not just arisal of, it's just like misconception, oh, karma doesn't exist, but really coming to the conclusion, it definitely, karma doesn't exist. There's no such thing as past and future lives. That's baloney. That kind of wrong view, that kind of, erroneous view is considered wrong view. So just having doubt whether past and future lives exist, you might think, oh, I'm such a bad person, I have wrong view. That's not wrong view. That's still doubt. Okay. So, so as is said in the Abhidharma Kosha, the Treasury of Knowledge, through condensing the most obvious among them, the numberless actions, the paths of action, through condensing the most obvious among them, the paths of actions, the virtuous and non-virtuous in kind, were taught to be 10. So I mentioned this once before. Well, I'll let Mark has a standing question there. I didn't address that before. So Mark, what was your thought? You have to unmute yourself first.
No, I'm sorry. I don't know how to quite ask this, but it gets to mental karma. And I'll use myself as an example. I have this horrible time of obsessive thoughts, like violent thoughts, wanting to harm someone, but I've never done anything, so I'm wondering, and I do the opposite, I try to, save birds at the beach and such and things like that. But I'm wondering what's more powerful, the mental action of thinking, the fantasy of harm, or the physical action of speech and body of withholding of doing the opposite. I don't know if that quite makes sense.
Yeah. So
because I know like the mental karma is heavy, it's negative, but what's more powerful, I guess what I'm trying to say, a physical action of body and speech or a mental karma? Like what takes more precedence?
It's hard to say. It depends on the mental karma. If you have, for instance, if you're, say the thought of angry thought or violent thought is one that falls into the category of malice, which, as I said, is not just anger. It's a thought that I will do that. So that's the difference. So like say, for instance, if you get angry at Trump, or maybe to be equal, Pelosi, I don't want to be too political, but if you get angry with them, think, oh, they're deserving of going to prison, or and so forth. That's one thing. But if you think I will do that, and there, the people recently that, in the insurrection and so forth, there were people that were actually planning to do these things. If they got a hold of Pence or someone, they were planning they would have strung him up or so forth. So that would be very, very heavy negative karma. Simply having anger arise in the mind, having violent thoughts is one thing. If you can subdue that to the extent that you don't make the decision, I will carry that out, that has much less efficacy. It's hard to say, how that compares with physical and verbal actions, because physical and verbal actions are all preceded by mental decision to do them, unless they're unmotivated. if you kill an animal, you've made the decision mentally to do that, unless it's an accident again. So you think you're shooting the tree and you shoot a squirrel or something. But if you decided to go hunting for a deer or something, you've also made the mental action to do that, and now you're carrying it out. So in a sense, that is a double whammy. You've got the mental action and the physical counterpart of it, whereas the mental action is, thinking, I could kill a deer. I could kill a deer. Deers deserve to be killed. If you don't make the decision to kill the deer, that's not as strong as, actually going out and killing a deer, obviously, right?
Is there a virtue if you find yourself in these thoughts, like just saying stop, is there a virtue in trying to have some forbearance in, knowing you're going down the wrong road, so to speak, mentally?
Yeah, well, that wouldn't be called forbearance. Depends on what you mean by forbearance. So
trying to stop
you want to be patient with you don't want to be patient with the mind that's getting angry.
Yeah, well,
you don't want to be, you don't have forbearance with that. You want to think,
yeah.
So if the mind is getting angry, there's great virtue in recognizing the negative consequences of that and applying antidotes. That actually creates virtuous karma, applying the antidotes to that. So even if you get angry, you could think, oh man, I shouldn't, this is not good. I'm leaving imprints to easily get angry again in the future. If I don't watch myself, I could carry them out in body or speech. So I'm going to apply antidotes to this. That itself creates virtuous karma.
Okay.
Applying the antidotes. Okay. So what's the difference between the 10 non-virtues and the 10 non-virtuous paths of actions? I've asked this before. Bob, did you ever follow that through? I think I asked you in one of the other classes.
Yeah, I remember you saying that, but I forgot the answer.
So when we talk about paths of actions, for an action to be complete, there has to be the recognition of the object, the presence of a delusion, the intention, the mental factor intention to do the action, and the completion of the action. There are various elements that are involved in that, you could say, that path of action. If something has all of the elements involved, like say, for instance, you wanted to steal a purse and instead you stole a cup by mistake. You were intending, maybe it was in a box, and that would lack one of the elements of the path of action of stealing. It would still be heavy negative karma, but you wouldn't have the same, strangely enough, you wouldn't have the same heavy negative karma if you recognize the object correctly and so forth. If you wanted to kill someone and you killed the wrong person, that would not be a complete path of action. So a complete path of action has the power to create throwing karma, to throw you into the lower realms or the upper realms. If you have all of the elements. If they lack some of the elements, they don't become a complete path of action. They're just, they're virtuous or non-virtuous actions. So we could say the 10 non-virtuous actions. If you try to kill, but you didn't, the person didn't die before you, or you chose the wrong, you killed the wrong person, or your motivation wavered somewhere along the line, it's not a complete path of action. So it may not have the karma to throw you into the lower realms if you're talking about killing. Furthermore, when actions are divided, there are three: virtuous, non-virtuous, and unspecified. What I've been translated is, usually we translated in the past unpredicted, because the Buddha didn't specify or predict whether it was virtuous or non-virtuous. That means it's kind of neutral action. In this regard, it is very important to know in detail the identities of these actions. So it's very important to learn, to study about the 10 non-virtuous actions and the paths of actions. It's very important to know the manner in which their results are established. That is, if you complete the action and so forth, and you say, for instance, if you've stolen something and you realized you walked out of the store with something in your pocket or something like that, rather than the final completion of the act of stealing is thinking, it is mine. Rather than, if you understand all of the elements of the paths of the action, you can make, even if you create some negative karma, you can prevent it from becoming a complete path of action. It's important to know the distinctions between projecting and completing actions. What does that mean? What's another way of saying that? Projecting and completing actions. Does anyone know? Nadine? Oh, Mark, you're going to say, go ahead.
It's kind of like when you say, I did it, like you take pride in having stolen the thing. And like you said, it's mine, is like a certain, puts a stamp on it, like say, I did it. And
that is something related, but projecting karma means karma which will throw you into the lower realms or the upper realms. So neutral karma generally can't throw you into the, what do you call it? The desire realm. Neutral karma, some neutral karmas can throw you into the form and formless realm, but generally, so projecting karma is what we sometimes call throwing karma. Completing karma means those actions that you created, which will be experienced in those realms, that complete the experience in those realms, that don't actually throw you into another life. Distinction, it's important to know the distinctions between those that are definite to be experienced and those that are not definite to be experienced. So, Skylar, do you know what that is? Karma, which is definite to be experienced.
Would that just kind of mean like the karma that you haven't purified, and so you're definitely going to experience the result?
Getting there. Anyone have an idea? Stephen, do you know what that means? Definite to be experienced and not definite to be experienced?
Oh, thank you, Venerable George. Well, so what it brings up in my mind is that negative karma will remain negative, although it can be mitigated, for example, through purification. That's what I think of when I hear karma is definite.
Right. But these are important things to learn about. You can read about it in the Lan Rim. Definite to be experienced means that you had the intention to do the action. In not definite to be experienced means accidental, means you did something without intention. So those kinds of actions are not definite to be experienced. They can remain on the mind stream, and in some circumstances, they may ripen. The example that I've given before in one, I think in the tenets class, is the famous story of Nagarjuna. One of his friends, a king, was very, very close to Nagarjuna, and the prince, the king's son, wanted to become king. Remember this story? No, okay. So he came to Nagarjuna and said, the only way I can become king is if my father dies, but he will not die until you die. You have some karmic relationship with my father. So please, Nargajuna, can you die? And Nargajuna said, well, I do remember, I do have, consciousness of having killed an ant in a previous lifetime while not intending to, while cutting the sugar cane, with my scythe. I sliced off the head of this ant. And therefore, because I did not intend to do that, that was an action which was not definite to be experienced, but it is still in my mind stream. So by my motivation, I can cause that to ripen. And he was only able to, supposedly Nargajuna, cut off his head with a long, one of these long blades of serrated grass, whole legend about that. Whether that's the legend is true or not, you can decide. But the fact is, it's referring to an action which was not definite to be experienced. That means it could be experienced under certain circumstances, but there was no certainty that it would ripen because it didn't have the intention behind it. So you can read in the Lan Rim in the section on karma. Then in regard to actions that are definite to be experienced, those that had intention and so forth, actions that will be experienced in the present life, action that will be experienced upon taking rebirth, and action that will be experienced in some other rebirth. These are basic points of karma, but it's worth going over because some of you haven't heard or, pursued those topics before. You listened to the names and didn't mean anything. So what does that mean? Action that will be experienced in the present life. What kind of karma can you create that will be experienced in this life?
Like if you harm your llama or kill your parents, that's strong enough. It's Karen, sorry, that you might experience it in this life.
Yeah, your mama. Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So it is said that some karma is heavy enough that it can be experienced in this life. For instance, actions that you create as a child with respect to your parents, like if you're if you take care of them or you abuse them and so forth, that can ripen later in this lifetime. I don't know if you kill your parent, later in life, if that's the same kind of thing, but it might be. But karma that you create with very, very heavy objects of karma, that is to say, recipients of your, you are the recipient of their kindness, say your gurus, your parents, actions that you create with respect to them are so heavy that in some cases they can ripen this lifetime. So through the practice of guru devotion, that karma can ripen even this lifetime, which brings about the possibility of making, rapid spiritual development. Most actions, if I punch David in the shoulder and then he slaps me back in response, some people say, oh, that's instant karma. That's not the result of my punching him in the shoulder, his slapping me in the face. Okay, that provided a cooperative condition, my punching him in the shoulder, and then his mind rose, and then some other karma that I have to be slapped ripened, not the karma of punching him in the shoulder. So that has to be understood. Then there's action to be experienced upon taking rebirth. What's an example of that? Anyone know? Nadine, do you know?
Yes,
That means in the
if
next
someone
life.
does, yes, if someone does something very virtuous and it ripens in his next life is happiness.
Yeah, sometimes. But here it says actions that will be experienced about taking rebirth. Say, for instance, when we talk about the 5 actions of immediate retribution. Have you heard of that? Sometimes called the 5 heinous actions. You've heard of those, right? Killing one's, drawing blood from the Tathagata and causing schism in the Sangha, or killing one's mother or father. So those actions are so heavy that they will ripen in the next lifetime without any intervening lives in between. Some actions is, you could create actions this lifetime that may ripen the next lifetime, but are not definite to ripen the next lifetime. But here, the third category is actions that will be experienced in some other rebirth. So the second category, those that will be experienced upon taking rebirth, are more in the category of the 5 actions of immediate retribution. Actions that will be experienced in some other rebirth are all the other actions, virtuous actions or non-virtuous actions, that will, remain on your mind stream until the right conditions arise. Louis, you have a thought. You're muted.
I misunderstood the question. I thought that the answer to the question that you didn't ask was actions that are ripening that's similar to the cause or similar to the effect of whatever the karma was. I was answering that question that was not asked.
Oh.
So
okay. So then Kachin Yeshi Gelson says, fearing wordiness, being apprehensive that I'm talking too much, I will not elaborate on them here. Those who have dexterity of intelligence, who have skillful mind, should know them carefully, consulting the root text and the self-commentary of the Abhidharma Kosha, the Treasury of Knowledge, composed by the supreme scholar Vasubandhu, as well as the stainless, excellent explanations of the foremost omniscient one, who is referring to Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa. So by looking at the middling or extensive Lan Rims, by Lama Tsongkhapa, and his disciples that wrote Lan Rims that sort of expanded on those subjects, the joyful path and the quick path and the sacred words of Manjushri and so forth, and the essence of refined gold, all these various Lan Rim texts. There are, 9 or 10 or more very, very famous Lan Rim texts, talking about the same subjects, slightly with different words and so forth, but enumerated. The Dalai Lama has even given explanations of all of them at various times, because they all have, various points that they elucidate. But in those texts, when you talk about the section of karma, they'll talk about these subjects. The identities of the actions, negative and virtuous actions, the manner in which their results are established through the paths of actions and so forth, the distinctions between throwing karma and completing karma, projecting and completing, the distinctions between those that are definite to be experienced and those that are not definite to be experienced. You can know those through those Lan Rim texts. Okay? So do that. So just as an introduction, the next one, contact. Rekpa. In Sanskrit, it's sparsha, like also in sometimes when you, in the tantric sadhanas, you offer sparsha, you offer something that's pleasing to the touch or something like that, but same word. What is contact? What is sparsha? What is rekpa? Here the wording of CG's translation is a little bit confusing. It probably is better to say, reading the sentence that she's translated backwards, upon aggregation of the three, that means upon the coming together of a faculty, an object, and a consciousness, and the transformation of the sense power, it is a distinguishing. And here's how Jeffrey Hopkins translates that. Contact distinguishes its object. So the word distinguish here doesn't mean distinguishing the transformation. It's talking about it knows or distinguishes its object as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. So contact actually knows, contact is a mental factor that knows the object is attractive, unattractive, or neutral upon the aggregation of the object's sense power and mind in accordance with the subsequent feelings of pleasure, pain, or neutrality. So contact doesn't feel pleasure, pain, or indifference, but it recognizes the object that is impinging upon the faculty as being pleasant, as being attractive, unattractive, or neutral. Do you see the difference between attractive and pleasurable? No. Think about it. So something that is attractive sort of pulls your attention to it. It's somehow indicative that if you follow that object, you will find pleasure. It's not necessarily synonymous with pleasure. So contact, in many of the texts, the main meaning of contact is it's a mental factor. It doesn't talk about contacting. It's not talking about coming in contact with something like the object coming in contact with the faculty, but upon the aggregation, upon coming together of the object, the faculty, and the consciousness, the mental factor contact brings about a transformation of the faculty to be able then to experience feeling afterwards. Feeling doesn't arise immediately upon the arisal of the mental factor contact. Feeling arises as a result of its transforming the faculty to be able to experience feeling afterwards. So fearing wordiness, I'm going to stop there. And we'll continue next time. Anyone have any final questions? Ali, you have a question.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I don't. I was like just like moving my hand around.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I'll be more careful.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, Doris has a question though. I think she's.
Mine goes back to discrimination.
Right.
And that list, just let me look at the text for a second.
Yeah.
The one that, I'm not going to look at the text. Unreasoned discrimination, unreasoned discrimination. There's a difference in the way our text is explaining it as opposed to Geshe-Rabtin's. And I've got my mind around it. I'm just wondering, for our purposes, should we be leaning to Geshe-Rabtin's explanation rather than the text?
So I contacted CG, who's an old friend who translated our text. And we what did we do? We Zoomed or we WhatsApped. We WhatsApped it the other day, and I showed her these different interpretations, and she agreed, and she has already sent to Olga, the director of the basic program, I think for the FPMT, the revised translation. So she's scrapping this old one, which was based on Jeffrey Hopkins' almost verbally exactly from Jeffrey Hopkins' Meditation on Emptiness. She said that during the time when she was translating this, it was like 20 years ago, and she had no idea how to translate this section. So she just went with Jeffrey Hopkins' translation. So I think she has, she's gone with essentially, instead of reasoned discrimination, discrimination conjoined with signs or having signs, and second one, discrimination without signs. And especially the examples that were given here, she has in parentheses, in sort of square brackets, unreasoned discrimination, which should be discrimination without signs. It is three kinds that are opposites of the three types of discrimination with signs mentioned above. And so the examples she gave are completely wrong. It should be discrimination unskilled in the relationship between names and objects, discrimination observing that which is not compounded or impermanent, meaning emptiness and permanent phenomena, and discrimination not having a clear object of observation and subjective aspect. So that's more or less with what Geshe Rapton had said. Those of you who have access to the book by Art Engel on the his translation of Vasubandhu's 5 skandhas, the Pancha Skandaka, it's called. His translation of that you can find on Amazon. In there, there's also the commentary by Stiramati, and that also accords with Geshe Rapton's interpretation. So that section, well, I'll try to, when I get a revised page, I'll pass that on to Bob or Shankar or both, and you can sort of fit that into the PDF in place of this page that has reasoned discrimination and unreasoned discrimination. Okay.
Thank you, Vanderbilt.
So thank you very much. Let's do a brief dedication, but powerful. Due to our motivation at the beginning of listening and taking part in the class, in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, we've created an enormous amount of virtuous karma. Think whatever way that ripens in the future, may it specifically become the cause of my spiritual evolution from life to life, up to and including my achievement of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. Due to these merits, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead each and every sentient being into that very same state. Thank you very much. Have a blissful week, blissful discussion group. And if you have any questions, save them up for next time, or you can always email me if you have some questions. Take care.